Okay, so now one of the things that happened on the campaign trail and through the transition team after the election was that a lot of the things that presidential candidate Bobby Kennedy wanted to do were not as possible because he was now going to be just one cabinet secretary. And HHS is a very important position when it comes to health, but it's not the only position. And in particular, EPA and USDA are also absolutely critical to the health of our nation, our food supply, and to getting toxins out of food, out of products that we use every day, out of clothing, et cetera. And my panelists today are some of the absolute experts on what the issues are within toxins and how we're going to work with USDA and EPA, and hopefully we'll have a conversation about the best way to do that, how we're going to figure out how to engage with an EPA and a USDA that are guided by President Trump's people as opposed to Secretary Kennedy's people. Now, that's not to say that there isn't already a great collaboration developing, and I understand from the Secretary that his relationship with Lee Zeldin and with Brooke Rollins is actually very good. Anyway, I'd like to hand it over to one of the heroic moms to start, who has been driving this agenda for a very long time. I first met her at the Children's Health Defense Conference in Savannah, where she caught my attention as an absolute get-it-done person, Zen Honeycutt. Actually, can we all have a round of applause for Zen Honeycutt? Zen, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Leland. Yes, I'm Zen Honeycutt, founding executive director of Moms Across America. We're a national coalition of unstoppable moms. And I've been working for about 12 years now, a little over 12 years, raising awareness about GMOs and glyphosate in the food supply and toxic pesticides, heavy metals, all of that, and have met with the EPA 4 or 5 times. I'm not exactly sure how many times now, so I'm sure we'll get more into what are the work and what we've been doing, or do you want me to talk now about that, or just
Please
introduction now?
Please just give it the main things that we need to accomplish. Then.
Okay, yeah, so there's a couple of main things that we need to address with the EPA. Number one is the major flaw in the regulation is that they only regulate one ingredient in a formulation of pesticides. Just one. For instance, in Roundup, it's just glyphosate because it's actually the most innocuous. It's not the most acutely toxic. The other ingredients are 1,000 times more toxic than glyphosate itself. And I have specifically asked the Pesticide Review Board director, do you have any long-term animal studies with blood analysis on the final formulation of Roundup? And he said, which formulation, which brand? There's 750 of them. I said, any of them. He said, no. And I said, then how can you say it's safe and allow it for use? And he closed the meeting, right? So that's one problem. They don't regulate the final formulation of any of these pesticides that they are now giving complete immunity to in North Dakota, Georgia, and considering this in North Carolina, and will be considering for the entire United States, that none of these pesticides you will be able to sue these manufacturers for if you get cancer or have a miscarriage because of contact with these pesticides.
We've been through this before with pharmaceuticals,
yes, this is
right?
exactly like what the vaccine companies did. However, the vaccine companies at least got, I know this is even terrible just to say this, but they got a recording system, right? They got VARs where you can report that you got injured from the vaccines. They got a special fund and they got a court system where you can actually go through a lawsuit. The pesticide companies want none of that. Too bad, so sad. If you get cancer, you're on your own. And if you go bankrupt, who's going to take the debt of $100,000 a month from cancer? The state, right? You'll just go bankrupt, and all that money will have to go to, I don't know, the state or the insurance system companies or whatever. So that's the first thing. They do not regulate the final formulation. The second one is that the maximum residue levels are completely bunk. They're based on what the industry uses on the crop, not on health and safety. So let me give you an example. If it was based on health and safety, people like Don Huber, who's a 60-year plant pathologist and worked with NASA, and he's a professor emeritus at Purdue University, says that 0.1 parts per billion of glyphosate should be avoided because it can cause sex hormone changes and liver and kidney damages in rats and animals, right? So 0.1 parts per billion. If that were actually utilized, then all of the crops, corn, soy, sugar, all it would be 0.1 parts per billion. But it's not. The crops have 1 part per million, which is 1,000 parts per billion. Mint is 200 parts per million, which is 200,000 parts per million. Wheat is 30 parts per million, which is 30,000 parts per million. There's different levels for all these different crops. That's not based on health and safety. That's based on the usage on the crop, right? That the manufacturer says, oh, you need to raise the levels on corn from 2.5 to 13 parts per million. Back in 2013, they did this. 300% because the farmers are using more glyphosate because there's super weeds happening and they're applying more glyphosate. So the EPA says, okay, and they raise the levels, the maximum residue levels of glyphosate on corn with no scientific evidence that there's any, that is safe for human beings at all, right? So the EPA is completely bought out. And then also, major flaw, GMOs and pesticides are classified by the FDA as a process, not an additive. If they were classified as an additive, because you can test and you can find GMOs and glyphosate and pesticides, right, in the food. So I would assert that they're an additive. If they were classified as an additive, they would have to be safety tested and labeled. When you're buying crackers or bread or baby food, it would say that there's glyphosate in there, right? That's not happening. That can be fixed by the current FDA and needs to be. And currently, the FDA is now testing for, and I know this isn't EPA, I'm sorry, I'm digressing a little bit, but the FDA is only testing for 2 or 3 out of the top 25, well, actually, I don't know about right now, but when I was on the Organic Products Advisory Committee for the Secretary of Ag in the state of California, I got the list of what the FDA and the California Food and Drug Administration were testing for in foods, like 1,200 samples per year. And I compared what they were testing for as far as pesticides were concerned and what the EPA's list was for the top 25 most widely used pesticides. And the FDA had 2, and the California department had 3. So they were only testing for 2 or 3 of the top most widely used pesticides on our food, right? That's how they were regulating. They weren't testing for all 25 of the top 25 most widely used pesticides, and then they were coming back and saying, oh, 98% of the samples were below the maximum residue levels. And so the food is pretty safe, right? And we've already discussed the maximum residue levels are ridiculous anyway. So the last thing is that the EPA is allowing studies from the industry that are junk science. For instance, it was discovered under the Monsanto trial in the discovery papers that in order for Monsanto to get glyphosate approved, they submitted paperwork that showed that in a study, they took skin from a cadaver, they baked it, and then they froze it, and then they baked it, and they froze it, and they baked it again to make that skin like leather. And then they dripped glyphosate on it, and then they said, look, it doesn't soak into the skin. So you can spray glyphosate in espadrilles, right? And with no gloves on. And that's how they got Roundup to be sold for 40 years to backyard gardeners. And that's why many people, like one of my moms, her father died of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and her son got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma because her father used Roundup in the backyard and the son walked on it with bare feet. So they're lying and literally cooking the science in order to make a profit. And that has to stop. And this EPA needs to have the courage to put the health of the American people before the profit of these corporations. And I would assert that one of the reasons why they might do that is because our export partners might not smile too kindly on the fact that we have 85 pesticides on the grains and crops that we sell here that are banned in other countries. I don't think our export partners are going to put up with that too much longer.
Well, they already aren't, as I understand it.
They're starting to reject it, yeah. But there needs to be more pressure on the system.
Well, a lot of questions there. Let's move on. Robert Bocock, your history as a scientist and as a partner for Erin Brockovich is one of the most inspiring things in my early life as an interested environmental scientist. Can you tell us about the trajectory of your career, as well as where the work with Aaron Brockovich has taken you and what the urgent issues are now? Even the New York Times is reporting the PFAS issues. I don't actually know how you're supposed to pronounce that. PFAS. They're reporting it all the time, and I'm really grateful to the New York Times for doing at least that much, and that's very important reporting. So can you tell us what the situation is right now?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick Reader's Digest version to keep on time here. Working with Aaron for 35 years, and it was 10 years into that I had the opportunity to meet the then head of the Hudson River Keeper, Bobby Kennedy, and I did the environmental investigation on Newtown Creek in Manhattan with Bobby and the River Keeper. So that started that relationship over 25 years ago. I've been the State Attorney General's expert witness in the Flint, Michigan case. It's predominantly on water and wastewater issues with EPA. Down on fluoride, thanks for the moms that did all that work. That's a big problem. So I work with EPA. They are a dysfunctional organization. Yesterday, if you read the newspapers, Lee Zeldin did withdraw 4 of the PFAS chemicals that were set to be regulated under the last administration. However, he maintained the 2 most important, and I'll tell you why it's important that PFOA and PFOS, Scotchgard and Teflon. I mean, I'll just cut to the chase. Those are the 2 most toxic, and they're regulated at 4 parts per trillion in drinking water. But that's really made us take our eyes off the ball. And the reason that I say that is if you're regulating at 4 parts per trillion or nanograms per liter, that's a pretty low dose. Why it's so scary for those chemicals to be regulated at that level is, for the first time in my 40-year career in doing this, is these are bioaccumulators. I could take a cup of coffee, I could put an eyedropper of gasoline in it, drink it, and my body's going to get rid of it. Heard a lot about metabolism today. Well, I'll metabolize that in about 72 hours. I might cause a cancer to fester in my body, but it's going to be gone. The difference with these perfluorinated compounds, and there's 11,560 of them in commerce in the world today. That's 11,560, and we regulate 2. Laboratory tests can only detect 58. So if that tells you how prolific these chemicals are, it's literally the carpet under your feet. It's the tablecloth. It's in contact lenses. It's in your lipstick. It's why nail polish goes on smoothly. Okay, so it's kind of ubiquitous and it's everywhere. The reason that I say that we've taken our eyes off the ball is because currently I was up in Maine, okay? They didn't find PFAS in Maine from the Chinette paper factory where they make the cups and the bowls that go to our school lunch programs. They made the little paper trays, okay? They're coated in PFAS. Those were made in Maine. The people in Maine did not find that by going out and testing their drinking water. USDA went up and tested a bottle of milk at a grocery store, and it was at 400 parts. They went to the dairy. They tested the cows. The milk was off the charts. Why? Because we take the biosolids from our wastewater treatment plants, where all of these industries, whether they're electronics, paper manufacturers, you name it, it's used in so many different types of products, they discharge that to the wastewater treatment plants. Those biosolids are being land applied to our alfalfa fields. The cattle eat the alfalfa fields, the dairy cows, it goes into the milk. It's in our cheese, it's in our chicken, it's in our eggs, at higher concentrations than found in our drinking water. And we've created this vicious cycle. The biosolids go on the land, the leachate from the landfill goes to the wastewater treatment plant, which goes into the biosolids, which goes out onto the farms, which goes into our food supply. And I've got a spring, a natural spring in Northwest Georgia at 400,000 parts. Okay, the rivers flowing from Georgia into Alabama are at 850 parts. Okay, for PFOA and PFOS. Most of the areas in Northwest Georgia where carpet's manufactured are above 40,000 parts. It is what I consider a catastrophic condition. If you go to Washington, D.C., I just tested all of northern Pennsylvania. I tested 25 sites on the Occoquan River. Starts out coming out of a landfill, hits the Aquacon River, which is a large volume of water, at about 8, goes past the wastewater treatment plant, goes up to about 100. Then it goes to the drinking water treatment plant, Fairfax County, at about 25. Drinking water standard, 4. Okay, Lee Zeldin defended PFOA and PFOS. That MCL will remain intact. The other 4, the administration did a quick and dirty job on it. They put a chemical called Gen X, which is a carbon chain 6 as opposed to the carbon chain 8, which are these bioaccumulators. Gen X, I haven't found a drop. I've done 35,000 samples in Northwest Georgia, and there's not a drop of Gen X there. So he basically rolled back our regulation that's really not out in the environment. It does exist in Cape Fear because at Cape Fear, the DuPont was manufacturing and it was going down the Cape Fear River. But I've only found it in 2 places in the United States, so I'm not real worried about the fact that that one got rolled back. The really rough part about these chemicals, back to the bioaccumulation. They follow the protein chains in our body. They're in our blood. They're in our protein organs. The sad part about it is that when a mother gets pregnant, she basically transfers the accumulated PFAS in her body to the infant, purely equal. The day that that infant starts flowing blood through its body in the mother's womb, it is at the equal level of the mother. Here's the only time the mother's 8 years of PFAS that's accumulated in her body goes down is when that baby's born and she chooses to breastfeed. She transfers that protein from her, the baby's PFAS level goes up, the mother's goes down, okay? It actually lives, it actually accumulates in men 8 to 10 years because women lose it through blood and through menstruation. So men actually retain it longer. They're talking about sperm counts going down by 1/3 in the male population in this country right now. Different kind of fertility issue, but an issue just the same. I saw someone mouth half. It's literally, it's getting rough out there. So anyway, it's how we communicate the health effects of that to the EPA and the liaison work that MAHA can do to EPA to ensure that Lee Zeldin is informed. He took a lot of heat. He took a lot of heat from Republican congressmen. There is a PFAS task force in Congress. It is 50 Republicans and 50 Democrats. They will not be rolling these regulations back, but we need to focus on the hot spots, the catastrophic spots, our landfills, our wastewater treatment plants, and our farms that we've contaminated all across this country. The city of Houston, Texas brags on the internet today. If you go to their biosolids program, there are 23 wastewater treatment plants in Houston, and they spread their biosolids from Houston, Texas to Jacksonville, Florida, down the Highway 10 freeway, okay? There are, I hate calling out companies by name, but there's a Texas rice company, south of Houston to Galveston. Don't eat that rice, okay? It's out there, it's bad, it's something you need to know about. It's in free-range chickens because they eat the worms, which are pure protein right out of the soil. Most of the soil in Northwest Georgia is over 3,500 parts everywhere I test in a yard. So it's something we've got to be very concerned about. I look forward to working with you and communicating this to EPA and Lee Zeldin. There's a ton of regulations going through the review process over there right now, and we're going to stay on top of them.
Robert, thank you for that. That's really amazing. Well, fortunately, we have some support from the New York Times for that, so I'm sure that'll get done soon. I'd like to introduce Aaron Vandiver. Aaron Vandiver was the inspiration for this panel when we were going through the transition process. He rightly identified this as a cause for concern. Aaron, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background and then what you saw at the EPA, USDA nexus and how we could perhaps address that together.
Yeah, thank you very much, Leland, and thank you, everybody. I'm Aaron Vandiver. I worked on Secretary Kennedy's presidential campaign. I had the honor of working as senior writer for policy and communications. So I got to work on a lot of his written communications and policies for the campaign, including environmental policy. And, as Leland said, during the transition, identifying the EPA as a critical piece of the Make America Healthy Again agenda is something I was working on. I think it's really important to communicate the message that we have to align policies across these various government agencies, HHS, USDA, and EPA. I know it's been amazing watching this MAHA movement develop and this newfound awareness develop among millions of people that we're being poisoned and we're poisoning ourselves. I've also noticed that we're still connecting some dots. And one of the dots we need to connect is to the environment EPA, because the EPA is the primary federal regulator of toxic chemicals, including pesticides, including PFAS, so everything Bob and Zen talked about, and more, mercury, for example. All of these things are really critical to achieving the MAHA goal of making America healthy again. And that's what the MAHA Presidential Commission is supposed to be working on. So the president's order creating the MAHA Commission, orders an assessment of certain chemicals and certain exposures and how those are affecting health, and then ask for recommendations on strategies. And the environmental element has to be part of that by necessity. And so interestingly enough, not everyone has gotten that memo. For example, 79 congressmen or Congress members sent Secretary Kennedy and the MAHA Commission a letter basically demanding that they back off of pesticides.
And this was Republicans who have been really supportive of other branches of the MAHA agenda.
Right. So that's a big problem, and there needs to be pushback, and I believe we are going to see pushback on that. And here's another really fascinating element is that here's an opportunity for MAHA activists to build bridges and alliances with more traditional environmental activists. And this is actually happening, and I know it's happening. And a lot of it is behind the scenes, and some people are not really willing to go public with that alliance just yet. But it is happening.
Yeah.
And that's super important.
That's right.
I think a lot of action is going to be there. And as we've talked about, it has to come back to the EPA because the EPA has primary regulatory authority in so many of these areas that are absolutely critical to health. For example, the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention in the EPA is where a lot of the action happens. And I think MAHA really should make itself heard on that, about that office and their work and the work of the EPA on toxic chemicals, and making sure that that office and the EPA are not under industry influence, because we're fighting industry influence in HHS, but we need to make sure that we're doing that across these other agencies as well. Because, once again, when you get right down to it, healthy people need a healthy environment. The health equation doesn't really work out. The math doesn't add up without the environmental side of it. And I believe that, this is an area where MAHA can really has a big opportunity here to build this focus and build new bridges and new alliances.
Thank you for that, Aaron, and I completely agree. We don't have much time left, but I do want to just throw out one quick question for basic ideas from anybody or from all of you. What is the sort of single most important thing that we can do about the toxics issue from your point of view, like ordinary citizens or highly motivated, politically engaged citizens? Go ahead, Zen.
So from my perspective, it is to ban the 85 pesticides that have already been banned in other nations. There's no reason why we should be consuming these pesticides.
Seems like an easy win.
Yeah. I know it's going to sound ridiculous, but it's common sense to me. In my perspective, that needs to happen. The number one pesticide that needs to be banned or herbicide is glyphosate. And I need to say something about this that most people in the room will not know. I only learned this 3 months ago, and I've been studying glyphosate for 12 years. And this is Michael McNeil from Ag Advisory has a slide and shows that 1/40th of the application of glyphosate, that is a drift level exposure only, reduces the nutrient uptake into the root of the plant by 20 to 85%. It reduces the nutrient uptake into the shoot of the plant by 80 to 95%. And the nutrients are magnesium, zinc, and iron. Those are the nutrients that are essential for the immune system of the plant, of our livestock, and of humans. So what's happening in America today with drift level only exposure of glyphosate is our farmers are growing nutrient deficient junk food that is not allowing our immune systems to function properly. Dr. Don Huber says that glyphosate exposure gives a plant essentially AIDS, an autoimmune system. So the normally harmless bacteria in the soil kills it. That's how it kills the plant. Think about what's happening in America today. The normally harmless bacteria, viruses, parasites, right, Lyme disease, and mold are harming and killing our children and our family members. So we cannot continue to, we will not be successful at making America healthy again if we continue to allow glyphosate at any use at all. And when people don't use glyphosate, they're going to say, oh, we need to go to dicamba or paraquat, and that's not acceptable either. We need to ban all of the 85 already banned pesticides, and we need to make a massive transition.
They seem to be growing food okay in other parts
countries.
of the world.
Yes, they do. And for thousands of years, farmers have grown these crops without toxic chemicals. So we just need to shift the subsidies from the GMO monocrop to the regenerative organic farming, and we can and we must do this.
That seems like an obvious one.
Yeah.
Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much.